So Henry, I have been in education for almost 30 years now. I started as a sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania selling carpet for the dorm rooms, and over the last 30 years have started and sold 3 companies in the education market, predominantly focused on higher ed, but recently, 2 years ago, started a K through 12 company as well. So I have had experience with for-profits. I recently started a not-for-profit, capital E, and I have some no-profits under my belt as well. So if I had a crystal ball and could tell you for certain where the education market is going, we would be talking on one of my private islands. But since I don't know for certain, I can give you my experience through some scar tissue and a few successes. But before I make that prediction, I look for 3 things in what makes for a successful organization. The first is best team wins. There is no substitute for talent, and irrespective of what type of entity, having talent as part of the organization is critical. The second objective or attribute that I look for in having a successful organization, which again will influence where the market may be 5 to 10 years from now, is having a great model. And I have an expression: the most stunning businesses are incredibly immune to bad management. In other words, a good model can cover up the ills of bad execution. The third attribute that makes for a successful organization is luck. And there's good luck and there's bad luck. And good luck normally has a tailwind behind them. I would say technology, if you're involved with that, that's an example of it will increase your probability with good luck. If you're in the printing business or offline, that's a tough model to create a lot of good luck from. So with that being said, now to answer your question about where do I see education 5 to 10 years from now, and I organize education in 3 areas: K-12, higher ed, and lifelong learning. Some people call it K to gray, some people call it cradle to grave, but we'll call it across the board. Everyone is involved in education, both as teachers and as students. And I believe that over the next 10 years, there will be a greater transformation, in some ways analogous to the internet 20 years ago. We talk about education as a 19th century and older model. We talk about 20th century teachers, and we talk about 21st century students. And there's a tremendous gap among the 3, specifically between the teacher and the student. My 3 kids are 13, 11, and 6, and all of them are part of the 21st century, and they learn a lot differently than we do. And one of the challenges is they have 30 to 60-year-old teachers that are 20th century teachers, and they are not digital natives the way my children are. So one of the main opportunities in the next 5 to 10 years is to leverage technology and close the gap between the student and the teacher, and also close the gap between the teacher and the 19th, 20th century teaching model, where it's one-to-many as the sage on the stage, instead of the one-to-one tailored guide on the side that online and digital learning provides. Unfortunately, I do not have much experience with superintendents or even principals at the K-12 level, but I have almost 30 years experience at the higher ed level, not only with presidents, provosts, but students and decision makers. One of my many sayings is, it takes 7 to say yes and one to say no. And education, especially some of the traditional higher ed organizations, can be similar to the government where they're extremely bureaucratic. And as a result, they can be glacier-like in decision making. And one of the reasons why the for-profits have excelled, especially in the early part of 2000s, is they understand speed and they can be nimble and they understand what the consumer needs and wants. I believe the traditional schools are starting to learn from some of these for-profits and recognize the need to make quicker decisions, to be more consumer-driven and consumer-focused. So it's important for people to recognize that it takes longer and more expensive when you're trying to break into the traditional education market, but there are a number of opportunities to partner with some companies that have already broken into the traditional market and are looking at some early adopters of some forward-thinking presidents, provost, decision makers that recognize the value of partnerships and recognize the value of outsourcing and optimizing. If it is not core to the school, there's an opportunity to have a private company partner to optimize both the economics of the relationship and the outcome and maximize the value. Well, one of the areas that I have been involved with has been in student loans. And this is obviously an area, being able to afford college is something that's not going away. And there is no easy answer to this challenge. One of the problems in education that's similar to healthcare, and it's ironic that we're talking on, in essence, the eve of Obamacare. The common denominator for education and healthcare is that they are both so human capital driven that they do not have the economies and the advantages that many other industries that can leverage technology. For example, the computer, which has become exponentially faster and better, has become less expensive because we're able to leverage and scale that. In technology, we're just starting to break into education and healthcare where it's been so human capital driven, which is one of the main reasons why the costs have gone up exponentially over the last 20, 30 years. In addition, one of the challenges with higher ed in particular are the rankings and the amount of money that spent related to rankings. Real estate's another challenge. We're not really getting the outcomes at the level of the money that we're spending on real estate on college campuses. And I know this is controversial, this statement, but tenure is very expensive. And there are not many other industries where so much is spent in keeping someone that necessarily does not add the value and create the outcomes and optimize the ROI of the market that they're part of. So my sister is a teacher. She has been for 30 years, and she won Disney Teacher of the Year as a technology specialist in early childhood development. And it's not fair that teachers do not get paid more with the value that they create. With that being said, there are a lot of opportunities in addition to teaching to create value, not only educating our future, but effectuating exponential change in education. We are, as a country, I believe, 20th in the world in K-12, which is staggering to me, which with as successful a country as we are, to be that low. In all fairness, we are probably the best in entrepreneurial endeavors, and it's hard to be great right side and left side. So what we lose on our standardized testing as a country and as students, I think we make up for in the entrepreneurial side, creativity side, although they should not be mutually exclusive. And to answer your question now specifically, human capital is, I think, the most important asset that any industry can focus on to make a difference and to be better. And education, because as a teacher has not paid well, we have not necessarily been able to recruit at the level that we should. Making a difference, I'm not so sure there's any industry where there's more of a noble cause, but from a pay standpoint. So that's the biggest challenge. In the private sector of education, I've been fortunate in a couple ways. One is I have used an executive recruiter that understands my interest in education and growing companies and doing good and doing well. They're not mutually exclusive. We believe in making a difference, but profit's not a bad word. For an example, we revenue share with schools, where not only are we bringing worthwhile products and services, but we also create scholarships and generate revenue that the schools can use for areas that are important to them. So recruiting talent, I think there are a couple things that are required. One is bring in professional recruiters that help understand your mission, help understand your culture, and really understand how to attract and recruit and really acquire talent in other industries. There's an expression, best athlete available, where sometimes you can bring in thought leaders that are in other industries that can really create some value and have not been focused in education. That's one thing we try to do. But also there's what's called a line position, as we make the sports analogy as best team wins, and bringing an educator that has been exceptional. That's a great opportunity if you want to leverage their experience in the industry of education as well. One example, I was fortunate to use an executive recruiter to recruit the executive vice provost of Johns Hopkins into a startup. And the reason why we were able to do that is because we understood what the startup needed and what we needed, and what the person that we recruited, their skill sets matched our needs extremely well. So understanding what's needed and going after it and being targeted on talent, and then you got to deliver and execute as a company. So recruiting human capital is a really important issue. It's a tough thing to do. Well, I think one of the most important elements of my leadership style is in my 30 years in the multiple companies that I've started and have been affiliated with. I believe nobody works for me. I believe people work with me. And that's an important distinction from, I think, a lot of leaders. I've always hated the word subordinate, and I've always felt that irrespective of where the right answer comes from, we want to get to the right answer. And I am not scared at making a difficult business decision, but I am so supportive and try to foster an environment that encourages risk, encourage people to make mistakes, because if they don't make a mistake, as Mario Andretti would say, if you don't crash, you're not driving fast enough. And we just hope that, we stay above the waterline when we make mistakes and we don't drown. And as an entrepreneur, you live to fight another day. But I think mutual respect, working with each other, recognizing that meritocracy is important. I'd much rather be rich than king, is one of my many sayings. I'd much rather be right in getting to the answer no matter where it comes from. And we try to subjugate our ego, and it doesn't matter so much what we think, it's what the market thinks. And I think that's really important, and we try not to take anything personally. One of the best lessons I learned, I heard one of our Supreme Court judges talk about how they work together. And one is each person talks once before the other person talks. And the second is they come in every day in a fresh start and they don't take anything personally from the prior day. And I would love to be able to run a company with some of those recommendations. I tell a lot of my team, do as I say, not as I do. And another important skill set that I'm not as good at, but I think is critical to being an effective leader, is listening. And we are so passionate about what we're doing, sometimes we don't do as good a job listening, not only to our team and our employees, but listening to the market. And I've always struggled with who's more important, the employees, the team, or the customer. And at the end of the day, I've decided they're equally important. So I am 47 years old now. I started my sophomore year when I was 19, so almost 30 years, 28 if my math is right. And a lot of people, the first 15 years or half of my entrepreneurial career, because I've never had a job, used to say, wow, you're an entrepreneur, and I didn't get it. And it was just natural because I fell into a business that worked and I didn't appreciate it. Well, the last 15 years with 3 kids and multiple businesses, again, having a for-profit, not-for-profit, and some no-profits, as I like to say, I appreciate the respect that entrepreneurs deserve sometimes and warrant. And the reason why I respect it more now, because I do have 3 kids, and I do have a wife, and I have had hundreds of employees that I have hired, and that coming up with $500,000 in payroll every 2 weeks and the responsibility to employees is a big deal. Also, it's a big deal to your family, and it's a big deal when you've raised money to investors, even if they've put equity in and they recognize they may never get it back. You're putting your name and reputation on the line. So there is a lot of risk in the different constituencies that you are influencing when you become an entrepreneur. It's also lonely being an entrepreneur. There are a number of organizations and leadership groups where you can learn some best practices. Not only can you commiserate together, which I think is important, but hopefully you can celebrate together as well. Entrepreneurship has really grown, especially with the advent of the internet, because it's a lot easier to start a business than it was 30 years ago in terms of being able to market to people and the amount of capital required to get off the ground. I also think that small businesses create an enormous amount of jobs and create tremendous change. One of the analogies that I make, an entrepreneurial company is more like a speedboat, and they have the ability to change on a dime. Larger organizations and company are much slower, and colleges and universities and school systems are more like these large organizations and these steamliners that can't move as quickly as these entrepreneurs. And one of the last points, I started an organization called Capital E, which the impetus behind it is what Silicon Valley is to technology, what Madison Avenue is to advertising, what Wall Street is to finance, Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and of course Baltimore is to education technology. And our objective is to accomplish 3 things. One is to create partnerships between the private sector and the public sector. And to the point that I just made, entrepreneurial organizations and larger organizations, if they can work together, I think we optimize some of the outcomes and some of the opportunities in education. That's one. The second objective of Capital E is to integrate K-12, higher ed, and lifelong learning. There are a number of silos among those 3 and organizations and conferences, but if we can integrate them and have them work together, again, similar to the private-public partnership, I think our outcomes can be more successful. And then last, this region and this quarter, similar to what Silicon Valley is technology, is incredibly, it's stunning how many entrepreneurs and how many organizations, private sector, public sector, are in education, and to leverage the human capital, the financial capital, and take advantage of 21st century innovation technology. We have an incredible opportunity to strengthen this region, to strengthen the United States, and also to make a difference globally in education and ed tech. And one of the conferences or organizations I'm part of is YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And they had Steve, the founder of Steve Case, they had Ted Leonsis, and they have the former governor and current senator, Mark Warner. And all of them have been in the private sector successfully. And Mark Warner talked about why he went into the public sector. And he said to Steve Case, he said, you know, you have a budget of a couple $2 billion when you were at AOL. He said the budget for, I think, education of the state of Virginia is 30 times that. So the difference that I can make in the public sector is sometimes exponentially greater than the private sector. So making a difference, I'll never say never, because I think the public sector has tremendous opportunity and has a platform that sometimes even the private sector and even the most successfuls do not have. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity to get involved in the public sector, and they're not mutually exclusive.